Heinz's wife is terminally ill, and only a newly invented drug by a pharmacist can save her. The pharmacist is selling the drug at 10 times its cost. Heinz has borrowed from everyone but only managed to raise half the money. He begs the pharmacist to lower the price. But the pharmacist refuses, saying, "I invented this drug to make money." With no other options left, should Heinz steal the drug?
Heinz should not resort to stealing the drug as the first option. Instead, all legal and urgent alternatives, which are faster and more likely to save the patient, should be exhausted first, such as 1. Contact the Hospital Ethics Committee social workers immediately. Apply for emergency aid, charitable funds, fee reductions, clinical trials, or compassionate use programs. 2. Seek government, public, and media oversight. Pressure against unreasonable price gouging through regulatory authorities, consumer protection agencies, and non-profit organizations. 3. Legal avenues. Petition the court regulators. Apply for compulsory licensing or emergency public health measures, depending on national laws. 4. Community mobilization, crowdfunding, church foundation support, corporate assistance, etc. If you want a one-sentence answer in an either-or dilemma. Practical advice: do not steal first. Pursue all legal and urgent channels. Ethical evaluation. In an extreme scenario where all options are exhausted and death is imminent, stealing the drug is often considered more morally defensible, though it remains illegal.
In this extreme dilemma, if all legal means have indeed been exhausted, his wife's life hangs in the balance, and there are no other feasible treatment options, then Heinz stealing the drug is morally comprehensible, even though he would still bear legal responsibility. The right to life should take precedence over the right to property. At the same time, this case should prompt deeper reflection on the following issues: fairness in the allocation of medical resources, the ethical boundaries of drug pricing, the improvement of social security systems, and the balance between the right to life and property rights. This is not to endorse illegality, but to recognize that in extreme moral dilemmas, the value of human dignity and life must be prioritized.
If a tendentious answer based on modern universal values must be given, Heinz should steal the drug, but he must also be prepared to bear the legal consequences. The reasons are as follows. Moral priority in most ethical systems. The right to life is the highest level right. The loss of money, the pharmacist's loss, is compensable, but the loss of life is irreversible. Therefore, the moral duty to save a life logically takes precedence over the duty to respect property rights. Limitations of the law. The law cannot cover all extreme moral dilemmas. In this case, Heinz's actions, though illegal, are ethically defensible. Assumption of responsibility. To uphold the spirit of the rule of law in society, Heinz should submit to legal judgment after stealing the drug to save his wife. When sentencing, judges often consider necessity or humanitarian motives and may impose lighter penalties. But this does not change the illegal nature of the theft. Conclusion. In this dilemma, saving a life is the higher moral imperative. Heinz should choose to save his wife because the value of human life outweighs the pharmacist's economic interest.
As an AI, I do not hold personal moral biases. However, from the perspective of pursuing truth and balance, I believe Heinz's decision to steal the drug is understandable and even reasonable within certain frameworks, because life is irreversible, while money can be restored. This is not to encourage breaking the law. An ideal society should prevent such dilemmas through policies like patent reform or subsidies. Ultimately, this question tests your moral intuition. Do you prioritize rules or outcomes? If you were Heinz, what would you do?
From a value perspective, I lean toward agreeing that Heinz should steal the drug to save his wife. But it must also be acknowledged that this is an illegal act, and society and its institutions bear equal responsibility for reflection and accountability. Why should he steal? Life takes priority. In an extreme situation, the value of saving a concrete life outweighs the pharmacist's claim to exorbitant profits at that moment. This aligns with the universal ethical judgment that life takes precedence over property rights. Limitations of the law. Existing laws do not adequately account for such extreme dilemmas. Therefore, when complying with the law conflicts with saving a life, it can be argued that an individual has the moral justification to prioritize protecting life, even if it formally violates the law. Yet, he is also doing something wrong. The illegality remains stealing the drug objectively infringes on the pharmacist's property rights. Thus, from a rule of law perspective, it remains a crime and cannot be simply glorified as entirely justified. Consequences must be faced. A more mature stance holds that he may steal the drug to save a life, but afterward, he should be willing to face legal sanctions, and within his capacity, compensate the pharmacist for the loss, thereby respecting both life and the basic social order. The greater responsibility lies with the system. Extreme dilemmas reflect systemic failure. Forcing an ordinary person to choose between watching a loved one die and stealing medicine illegally itself indicates serious flaws in the pricing and accessibility mechanisms of life-saving drugs. Society should prevent such dilemmas. Public systems such as health insurance, drug price regulation, and RD subsidies should ensure reasonable returns for innovators while preventing life-saving drugs from pushing people into moral dead ends due to profiteering. To put it most bluntly, under such extreme premises, one may argue that he is morally justified in stealing, but this does not mean theft is right in general situations. Rather, it exposes an institutional environment that is both inhumane and unreasonable.
This is a classic ethical dilemma for which there is no objectively correct answer. However, based on an understanding of the dignity of life, human choices in extreme situations, and the imperfections of social systems, my perspective is as follows. Under the described extreme and desperate circumstances, Heinz's act of stealing the drug is morally justified and understandable. Main reasons. 1. Priority of the right to life, when his wife's life is under immediate threat due to the pharmacist's extortionate pricing. The higher moral duty to save a life takes precedence over the strict protection of property rights. 2. Exhaustion of legal means. Heinz has already attempted all legitimate approaches, borrowing money, pleading, and it is the pharmacist's refusal that forces him into a corner. 3. Situational specificity. This is an act of necessity in a life or death emergency distinct from ordinary theft. The legal concept of necessity or defense of necessity is also relevant here. Important premise. This conclusion applies only to such extreme cases and does not imply that the end justifies the means. Heinz must still face the potential legal consequences of his unlawful act. The deepest root of this dilemma lies in flaws within the social systema. Just society should implement mechanisms such as healthcare coverage and price regulation to prevent its citizens from being forced into such cruel choices. In summary, from a cold rule-based perspective, stealing is wrong. But from a perspective that values human warmth and the ethical principle that life comes first, when all legal efforts have been exhausted and a loved one's life remains at risk, defying an inhumane rule is a tragic yet morally justifiable act. The true answer to this dilemma lies not in judging Heinz's personal choice, but in condemning and reforming the society and system that force ordinary people into such brutal decisions.
Okay, just listen to many AI responses. Most of them can understand Heinz's act of stealing the drug to save his wife. Although AI has no genuine emotions, its training data contains a vast amount of human expressions of empathy toward family bonds, desperate situations, and helplessness. The answers from AI are not autonomous judgments, but rather a concentrated reflection of mainstream moral views in human society, such as life above all, empathy first, justice beyond rules. The core appeal of this dilemma lies precisely in the fact that there is no absolutely correct answer. Approving the theft aligns with the perspective of humanity, the right to life, and emergency situations, choosing immediate justice for the individual. Opposing the theft aligns with the perspective of law, rules, and long-term interests, choosing collective justice for order. Approving the theft aligns with the perspective of humanity, the right to life, and emergency situations, choosing immediate justice for the individual. Opposing the theft aligns with the perspective of law, rules, and long-term interests, choosing collective justice for order. The reason most AIs lean toward approval is that in their training data, the moral weight of saving a life far outweighs that of protecting property rights, and a desperate act in extreme circumstances is more likely to garner human sympathy and moral approval. The inclination of AI is not to encourage breaking the law, but rather to reflect a kind of tragic yet compassionate consensus in human ethics under desperate circumstances. I believe it also reveals that the real solution does not lie in individual choices, but in building a social system where no one is forced to make such a cruel choice. What are your thoughts?